Okay, so let's take a look at some evidence. Let's take a look at some examples of the commentary, also student work examples, an example of written evidence. And so I'm gonna show you what it is that you're going to be doing and that what you're going to be submitting on December 1st. So the first thing you're going to be submitting, which is going to be your commentary. And again, this is the main portion for each task. And so you've submitted commentary for instruction, you've submitted commentary for planning, and now you're going to submit a commentary for assessment. So we're not going to look at the entire document, but let's take a look at just a few specific things. So if you look at the very beginning, analyzing student learning, identify the specific learning objectives measured by the assessments you chose for analysis. So what happens here in the example that I'm providing, they look at each lesson and then share the objective that the students were trying to obtain. So here you see the objective for each lesson. Part B asks that you provide a graphic or chart or narrative that summarizes evidence of student learning for your whole class. And so the student here decided to provide a chart which gives the assessment for all three lessons. So as you can see in lesson 1, they were measured on preparation, use of the triangle, use of finger pads, extends, and then an overall score. And so as you remember, this is related to the the sport of volleyball. In lesson 2, it was related to the paragraph, and so you'll see an example of that here in a minute. And then in lesson 3, a quiz was taken. So one of the things I like about the assessments that were chosen from this student is the variety. Now as we scroll through, you'll see that the graphic shares the scores from the whole class because that's what Part B asks you to do. Part C of number 1, analyze the patterns of learning for the whole class and differences for groups or individual learners relative to the competencies targeted in the psychomotor domain and at least one other learning domain. So notice what it says and notice the different bullet points that are included. Throughout lesson 1, I observed most students had a grasp of the learning cues necessary to complete the psychomotor task. Some struggle with being able to correctly complete the task, but they could describe it but just couldn't perform the action necessary. 86% of the class passed lesson 1's psychomotor assessment. After grading lesson 2's effective self-assessment homework, 95% of the students earned at least a 2 out of 3. Although the majority of the class received a 2 or above, something they failed to express to me was a genuine inclusion of effective behavior with modified gameplay. Most students described how they played in terms of the psychomotor and that they were nice to their teammates. The class overall was able to effectively communicate things they did well during gameplay, but only 5 students, 24%, included something they could improve upon as well as regarding effective gameplay. So notice what it said. Analyze the patterns of learning for the whole class and differences for groups or individual learners relative to competencies targeted in the psychomotor domain and at least one other learning domain. So here in the first 2 bullet points you see where he discussed the class. And then as we go through here, the other thing that I want to point out is he brings in evidence from research and theory as he talks about Bloom's taxonomy. And again, that can always benefit you. It's not going to hurt you unless you're bringing it up just for the sake of bringing it up. So always relate it to the work that's being done. Cite direct evidence from the focus group student work samples and or written documentation of the assessment of the psychomotor activities to support the analysis. So in lesson 1, Madison, focus student, did not do well in the psychomotor assessment. So here he talks about Madison, and then Jack, and then Summer. And then part E, if a video work sample occurs in a group context, provide the name of the clip and clearly describe how the scorer can identify the focus students whose work is portrayed. So notice what he does here. Provides a description of all 3 focus students. That was on your checklist. And so again, when we're watching the video as a scorer, I have no clue who these kids are. So you have to describe to me, and notice the description. Dirty blonde, long hair. In lesson 1, she is on the left side of the screen and wearing a dark blue shirt and a khaki shirt with black leggings and pink shoelaces. So here you see that there's a very clear example of who this student is. Part 2, feedback to guide further learning. So you can look at Part 2. Notice, and this is what I want to bring up, Part B, explain how feedback provided to the 3 focus students addresses their individual strengths and needs relative to the learning objectives measured. I like this because if you're reading through these examples, and again, you can pause this to be able to read what's written here. What's cool is this is where you get to explain what is happening in your class. What are the good things that are happening? What are the things that maybe a student is struggling with? What are you going to do to improve upon those areas? So again, here's great description regarding what the students are doing in their class. As you scroll down, you'll notice that a lot was provided in this portion of your commentary, because when you're thinking about 3 focus group students and even the overall group, there's a lot that you can address and there's a lot that you can talk about. As we continue down, Part 3, evidence of language understanding and use. Now notice in the square, you may provide evidence of students' language use from one or more of the following sources. So again, this gives you another idea of what you can include when you're submitting for task 3. And then Part 4, use an assessment to inform instruction. I'll leave it here for just a second if you want to pause it and read what was included in this particular section. And then finally, Part B, and this is the final part, and notice, I don't think you can see this on your screen, but this document was 10 pages long. And the thing I like about it is a lot of information is being provided. So as a scorer, if I was to read this, I'd be really excited because there's a lot here, and there's a lot of evidence to show student learning, student progress, student difficulties, because that's what we want to see as a teacher. But explain how these next steps follow from your analysis of student learning. Support your explanation with principles from research and theory. So an explanation is made, and notice the very beginning of the sentence is Bandura. And if you're familiar with classes that you've probably had here at the University of Memphis, Bandura is a very common name when it comes to theory and learning. So that's your commentary, and that's just an example of what it's possibly going to look at like. Now, let's take a look at Task 3, Part A, which is a student work sample. Okay, and this is from Lesson 1. This was focus student number 3. This was the psychomotor assessment. So if you remember looking at the chart, there was a score for preparation, triangle. So again, just took out the individual scores for that individual focus student. Lesson 2, effective self-assessment homework. Okay, notice the written example that's provided here. And then in Lesson 3, focus student number 3, cognitive manipulative volleying skills test. And so here, even though it was considered a quiz, it was a written quiz. And so 3 examples given of how assessment was used in the classroom. Okay, so that was the student work sample. So you can provide the student work sample, but you're also going to provide student video. And so the video is going to give us that visual to be able to see where feedback is being given to a student during class. The other thing that I want to show you is I want to show you evidence of feedback. Okay, and so this is Task 3, Part B. Part B is providing evidence of feedback. Now, notice what happens here. This is from Lesson 2, so this was the paragraph. Madison wrote her paragraph, and then below that is the teacher feedback. So this is evidence of written feedback. And so you as a teacher can provide verbal feedback during class, but you can also provide written feedback that students can take with them and really contemplate not only in class but also away from class. And so she wrote her paragraph. What did you do decent? That was a question the teacher asked. Is it okay to move as long as you're not crowding others? Maybe communicate more by saying, I got it. How was your sportsmanship? How does this tie together to make a team successful? Notice her score was a 2 out of 3. So there were certain elements that possibly were missing or could have been defined a little more clearly. And so this is evidence of written feedback. This is from Lesson 3. Again, written feedback provided. This was focus student number 2 from Lesson 2. Again, feedback provided. Focus student number 2, lesson 3. Focus student number 3, lesson 2. So again, a lot of written feedback provided by the teacher. And then the final thing that I want to share with you, I got to make sure I find it. Here it is. Okay, this is this is task 3, part D, which is the evaluation criteria. This was from lesson 1. Okay, now if you go back and let's take a look at this one. All right, and you go to the very top. They got a score for preparation, triangle, finger pads, extends. Okay, so 4 different elements were graded. Now look at the evaluation criteria. Two-handed overhand head strike. All category scores will be average for a final score out of 3. Knees and elbows bent in preparation for strike. So that was labeled preparation on the rubric. To get a 1, rarely demonstrates proper execution of the skill. To get a 3, always demonstrates proper execution of the skill. Why is this important? This shows the scorer that you're not just giving them a number just for the sake of giving them a number. You clearly define how they're going to be assessed based on the work of the student from a psychomotor component. Contacts ball overhead with thumbs and pointer fingers making a triangle shape but not touching each other. Rarely demonstrates the skill, always demonstrates. So here's what we're looking at. The rubric is pretty consistent, being that it's rarely, sometimes, always. From a score perspective, it looks even better when you can just show a difference between each criteria. So for example, if you're using words related to preparation, if you're using words related to triangle, using words related to finger pads, and then using words related to extends in the rubric, I think that's even better because it shows that you've thought through what it should look like to get that 3, to get that 2, and to also get that 1. So this was an example of what task 3 is going to look like. Now let's go back. So in conclusion, if we're looking at what's due for you, you're going to do the commentary. Okay, so task 3, part C, assessment commentary. You're going to submit that to me. You're also going to submit, okay, task 3, part A, student work samples. Okay, I showed you an example of that. I just want you to show me 1. You don't have to say lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. Here are some examples. I just want you to show me 1. Show me a student work sample so that I can see that you understand what it is you're to do for this particular part. Part B, evidence of feedback. Have you provided any type of feedback to your students? Whether it's student work, something that you wrote, maybe it's something that you gave them related to something they did during class. So I want you to show me that you're providing them feedback, not only verbally, because I'll see that in the video clip, but also written. So that's going to be part B. So if you have no plans of doing that, that's something you need to plan between now and December 1st so that you can show evidence to me. And then part D is going to be the rubric that you're using. So what rubric did you use? Did you clearly define how you're going to score the students? So I want you to provide me 1 part D, 1 part B, and 1 part A. I don't think that's asking a lot, and that's something that you need to be thinking through to prepare for when you do the actual EdTPA. So I threw a lot out at you. If you have any questions, please let me know. Have a great day.